Welcome back to the Foreign Desk podcast. I'm Lisa Daftari. So much going on as Russia continues 1 month since it began its invasion of Ukraine. Putin, accused of being a war criminal, has been sanctioned and called plenty of names, but he continues in his quest. While 3.4 million refugees have left Ukraine and thousands have been killed, including American journalists and citizens and others still looking to get out. President Biden, meanwhile, has just landed in Brussels, where he will be meeting with NATO members. Will we see further escalation, or is there a way out? To join me in conversation, breaking this all down, is my good friend Nile Gardiner, director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation, leading authority on Brexit. Before joining Heritage, Nile Gardiner served as foreign policy aide to Lady Thatcher in her private office in London. He is a prominent expert on U.S.-British relations, U.S. foreign policy, the transatlantic alliance, a PhD from Yale, undergraduate from Oxford. He's a smart guy, served as foreign policy advisor to 3 U.S. presidential candidates, including Ted Cruz, Mitt Romney, and Rudy Giuliani. Welcome back to the show, Nile.
It's great to be here. Thanks very much, Lisa. It's great to see you.
So now, as we speak, President Biden literally arrived in Brussels just a few moments ago, meeting with NATO members. What are your thoughts on what will he say and what can potentially come out of this trip?
Well, I have to say, this is an important trip for President Biden, arguably his most important overseas trip so far of his presidency. And Biden, as we well know, has come under a lot of fire domestically for his overall approach to the Ukraine crisis. He has been, I think, rightly criticized for a lack of strong, robust leadership over Ukraine. And many in Washington are arguing, including myself, that Biden's been far too deferential in a way to Vladimir Putin. Too many concessions, not enough tough resolve from the president. So, this is an opportunity for Joe Biden to rally the NATO alliance. He'll be in Brussels, of course, this week, but also in Warsaw as well, meeting with Polish leaders. So 2 very important components to this trip. And many of our European partners and allies are looking for strong, robust US leadership at this time. And in the wake of the Afghanistan withdrawal last year, there are many questions about US leadership globally. There is a sense in Europe that the United States is a superpower in decline. The Afghanistan withdrawal was an absolute catastrophe in the eyes of many of our European allies and partners. It also significantly, I think, emboldened Vladimir Putin. And I think that without the fall of Afghanistan, I very much doubt that Putin would be in Ukraine today. And I do think, the 2 are directly linked in the sense that, Putin sees America as weak. And so there is this concern, I think, in Europe that, Joe Biden doesn't have the kind of stomach to lead the free world. So let's see what happens. Let's see if Biden does redeem himself in any way. But he goes to Europe, I think, in a relatively weak position in terms of how he is viewed across the Atlantic. And I've spoken to a wide range of European politicians, MPs, government officials. And I would say the overall consensus is that Biden's been a huge disappointment, actually, as US president.
I think domestically, a lot of people, even those who voted for him, feel the same way, that it was lack of leadership and the posturing that led us to this moment. Is there something he can do to redeem himself, or to perhaps de-escalate, or what's the best case scenario? If you had his ear right now, how would you guide him as to how to handle this trip, what to say, and what's the best case scenario?
Well, I think firstly, Joe Biden has to really act like the leader of the free world. I think that, Biden has been, very weak-kneed as president. He has moved with, at an incredibly slow pace. In fact, Biden, as I wrote in a Telegraph article this morning, Joe Biden has sort of moved at the pace of a sort of tortoise on a hot surface, sort of slowly moving across a driveway. And you've got to act faster. So Biden he's very reactive rather than I would say anticipating events. So, for example, when Russian forces were massing on the border of Ukraine as early as March last year, Biden didn't respond at all. The British actually, in contrast, started supplying thousands of missiles to the Ukrainians over a year ago. And we're now seeing the impact of those missiles taking out Russian tanks, etc. And the British also had 1,000 trainers on the ground a year ago. to Ukraine, whereas Biden did basically nothing at all. So so Biden has to really, I think, lead. He has to rally the NATO alliance at a critically important time. And he has to, I think, project the kind of strength and resolve and leadership that is expected of the leader of the free world. He also has to come up, I think, with a clear-cut, plan of action for the NATO alliance. And so, for example, how is NATO going to respond to a chemical attack from Russia against Ukraine? How will the NATO alliance respond to the possibility of large-scale mass killing, ethnic cleansing? I mean, Putin's already beginning this now, but we need to see more detail about how the United States and NATO will respond to a further escalation of the crisis. And also, I think that it's time for Joe Biden to end this this ridiculous idea that we've got to stop provoking the Russians or escalating things, as what the White House called it. Biden needs to work with sending MiG-29 fighters over to Ukraine, as the Ukrainians have requested. The Poles have offered this. Biden claims he didn't know anything about it, which is a complete and utter lie. And so it's time for Biden to work with our allies, stop throwing them under the bus, especially the Poles, and show a bit of grit and determination. He leads the world superpower. The United States is the most powerful nation in the world. He doesn't need to kowtow or grovel to Vladimir Putin, as he has done on a number of fronts. So there are so many things actually that Biden should be doing. But the reality is that Biden, I have to say, behaves as world leader with a great degree of overconfidence, hubris, and not enough strategic foresight. In fact, there's no real White House strategy whatsoever, I think, for dealing with the Russians, long term as an adversary. And this is a huge failure of leadership, I think, on the part of the Biden presidency.
I want to bring everyone's attention to your article today in Telegraph. Joe Biden's apathetic approach to Putin is alienating America's allies. You talk about how the West is looking for U.S. leadership, but obviously President Biden failing to deliver that. You write, his leadership on the world stage projects a staggering complacency that lacks urgency, foresight, or any kind of strategic vision. To basically paraphrase from a very concise and well-written piece about what has not been done and what needs to be done. It's interesting to watch President Biden. He's promising us that chemical weapons will be used. He's not citing actual evidence. And then he's telling private companies with large online infrastructures, you have to harden your soft targets because there will in fact be a cyber attack. And on the other hand, he dragged his feet on the oil sanctions against Russia. He did an about-face about sending jets to Ukraine. He's shied away from a no-fly zone over Ukraine over fear of, escalating, and guess who doesn't fear escalation? The Russians. So why this back and forth? Is the White House truly confused? I mean, to your previous point, they do lack a strategy. We can all, I think, agree on that, and I think there's been a lot of bipartisan, hinting toward the fact that there is a lack of strategy here. But is this by design, or is there new intelligence that kind of makes them go back and forth? Why are we here, and why are we pussyfooting around on something so serious?
Well, I think there exists a sort of culture of fear within the the Biden White House. I mean, this is a fearful presidency. They they fear America's adversaries. They like to make concessions. It's not just on the Russian front. You see it with China. You see it with Iran. With the appalling negotiations that are taking place right alongside the Russians with regard to a new Iran nuclear deal. So there's kind of very, very muddled strategic thinking going on in this White House, but also clearly they fear America's adversaries. They fear what Putin may do next. They're absolutely petrified, of course, of being drawn into a bigger conflict in Europe. The best way to avoid being drawn into a sort of European-wide war is to stand up to Putin, with strength and resolve. And deterrence is by far the most effective way of avoiding being dragged into war. But Biden hasn't focused on deterrence. There was no deterrence ahead of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Right. And had Biden actually moved earlier to actually arm the Ukrainians with everything they needed, I think the Russians would have thought twice before invading Ukraine. Or if Biden had sanctioned the Nord Stream 2 pipeline being built from Russia to Germany, that would have sent a message to the Russians. On so many fronts, Biden has been terribly slow. He wouldn't sanction, Russian oil until he faced tremendous pressure, not only from Republicans, but also from his own party as well, condemned it.
Yeah.
So, this is a president who does everything at the last minute, only after being pressured into doing so. Why not take all this action, way before? And that's the best route for America to prevent being dragged into a wider war in Europe.
Now, obviously, and I want you to take a listen to this clip, and I want to get your thoughts on it. But President Biden and everyone around him, they know what it takes. They talk about leadership. They talk about delivering a stern message to Russia. And yet here we are. Take a listen to this clip.
We are at an inflection point, I believe, in the world economy. Not just the world economy, in the world. It occurs every 3 or 4 generations. As one of the top military people said to me in a secure meeting the other day, 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then, we established a liberal world order, and that hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people dying, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is a time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. We've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it. So anyway.
Okay, so if you can make out what he's saying, it's ironic because this is the Obama 2.0 presidency, but yet we definitely don't have the orator that we had in Obama and this guy. It's hard to make out what he's saying, and clear communications is not his or his vice president's strong suit by any means. So he talks about a reset. He talks about leadership. He talks about leading the world. What is this reset that he's referring to?
That's a good question because, a lot of what Biden says is frankly incomprehensible. And I was listening to that clip now, trying to figure out exactly what he was, trying to say. And I think the language he uses doesn't exactly help himself in talking about some new world order and so on. This is, some of this is kind of bizarre, talk actually. And so, the main thing here, of course, is that, the Russians seek to destroy, I think, American leadership on the world stage, and they seek to destroy the strength of the transatlantic alliance. They seek to destroy, I would say, Western leadership that has been dominant in the post World War II era. Basically, that's Putin's goal here. I mean, Ukraine is just part of the bigger jigsaw puzzle for Putin. If he can undermine, American leadership, Western leadership on the world stage, together with China, if possible, and working with the likes of Iran and North Korea and other rogue regimes, Putin's going to do that, actually. And so, I think that's really what, Biden should be focusing on. And, I have to say that, Biden, increasingly, he comes across as very confused in his statements. And it doesn't exactly fill us with reassurance. And so, Kamala Harris, frankly, is even worse. I mean, when she went over to Europe, about 3 weeks ago, and she went over to Poland, and she was literally, giggling and laughing in a press conference about Ukrainian refugees in Poland. And I thought, I mean, this is just catastrophic, actually. I mean, you have a Biden presidency that is all over the place. They don't take things seriously. You've got the vice president literally laughing next to the president of Poland. What are they thinking? I mean, this is just, they're just undermining America on the world stage here. And I fear for the future of the free world, frankly, with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris running the show.
Yeah, what's interesting, and I absolutely agree with you, but when he says new world order, I mean, this is more like the old world order when you have, a country invading another country. It takes us back, 5, 6 decades. We're talking about what does he mean that the U.S. should relinquish our leadership in the world? Because then he talks about leadership. So it's definitely confusing. And those who have sought out a way of explaining this have been called conspiracy theorists in the aftermath. So the media doesn't want us to talk about it. They want us to just sweep it away. They don't really want to kind of make any sense of what he's saying. But this kind of goes back to the, back and forth of a confusing message from the White House in a very, very important time. I want to bring your attention, Nile, to another piece of breaking news today, and that is the likelihood that NATO will approve more troops for its eastern flank. In your opinion, is this just posturing, or are we headed for actual, further military escalation in this sense?
Yeah, so I think what we are seeing is a sort of gradual increased U.S. military buildup on the eastern flank of the NATO alliance, the Baltic states, Poland, etc. And I mean, I do think this is the right approach, and also actually it's interesting that public opinion polls in the United States demonstrate strong support actually for the deployment of additional U.S. forces in Europe. There isn't, of course, public, majority support at all for anything like putting U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine. I don't think that either side of the political aisle is suggesting that in the United States. But there is strong public support actually for strengthening the NATO alliance, and I think that moves to deploy more U.S. forces to the eastern flank of NATO are the right thing. And also politically popular actually with the U.S. public, and that's an interesting perspective here. I mean, the U.S. public is not isolationist; actually, quite the opposite. They care about American leadership. But again, I think with Joe Biden, a lot of this is slow. Some of it's too little, too late, and this should have been done a lot earlier. This should have been done actually before the invasion of Ukraine to send another message of strength to Putin. Ronald Reagan would have vastly increased, I think, U.S. military power and capability in Eastern Europe to try and deter any effort by the Russians to do anything at all. So Biden, he always does stuff really at the last minute, and a lot of it seems kind of half.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a minute, Niall. Sorry to cut you off there. But along the same lines, if we do beef up our assets, the NATO alliance on the eastern flank, don't we increase the probability that Article 5 may be invoked at any point, and even accidentally?
Well, I mean, Article 5 would be automatically invoked as soon as the Russians make any attack on NATO territory or troops, and so that would come into play immediately. I mean, it doesn't matter how many troops you've got on the border, and I think we're far less likely to have to invoke Article 5 if we have a very big, not just U.S. military presence, but also allied presence. That has to include also not only Great Britain, of course, they've already got a lot of forces there, but all countries in the NATO alliance need to step up to the plate here, including the Germans, for example, who've been absolutely useless, I think, on the with regard to NATO issues in recent decades. And so this is not just a U.S. responsibility. I mean, all European nations need to be united together in sending forces to the Baltic states, for example. I think the Russians are far less likely to try anything if you've got a very large military presence in the Baltics and in Poland and countries like Romania as well. And so that, in my view, actually reduces the likelihood of some kind of actual military confrontation.
Yeah, and Zelensky in the last 24 hours says if it means having peace, we're not going to join NATO. And if we had on the foreign desk the 6 items that Putin has requested in order to actually begin talks or to begin a ceasefire, working towards some sort of diplomatic resolution. Is it really about NATO? Is it really about any one of these items? It seems like his list isn't that demanding when it comes to what Zelensky is willing to surrender, willing to give up. If the concessions, if the Ukrainians are willing to meet the concessions, if the Ukrainians are asking for talks, if Zelensky is saying we're not going to want to join NATO, then why aren't we moving forward with a diplomatic resolution here?
Well, I think I have a number of thoughts on this. Firstly, anything that Putin is saying, offering, demanding, I wouldn't trust anything at all coming from the Russians. You can't trust Putin. It's like a snake in the grass, really. Snakes in the grass, you've got to hit them on the head. And our goal, I think, in Ukraine should be the defeat of the Russians. And I don't think the Ukrainians are going to make any concessions, actually, to Russia, especially in light of the fact that the Russians are really struggling militarily. It's not a situation where, the Russians have... are in a position definitely to conquer and occupy the country. In fact, I think the Russians could lose this war thanks to the bravery of the Ukrainians combined with the tremendous, I think, amount of weaponry that's flowing in the country. So those two factors, plus you've got the sanctions factor as well, which is crippling the Russian economy. It's very expensive to fight a war. So, my view is that the Ukrainians are absolutely right, to avoid making any concessions. There have been talks already with the Russians. They've not conceded anything at all. And I think that that's the right approach. Ultimately, the Ukrainians themselves have to decide if they agree to some kind of peace terms. That's their decision. There should be no pressure applied from the United States or from NATO. That's a Ukrainian decision for them to make alone. But clearly, I think that Zelensky is feeling increasingly confident that the Russians are not going to be able to occupy the country. And the Russians, they're not going to take the capital city. I think it's such a huge city. I was there a few years ago. It's about the size of Berlin. It's very difficult to take Kyiv. And if the Russians don't take the capital city, they can't take the country. It's as simple as that.
It's what's interesting, and absolutely, I think you draw the outlines of the most important points here. They haven't been able to do much in a month. They haven't actually even taken one city completely, where they have been made headroads in each place, but not really completely taken over any one place, which is unusual. But the other point being that, does Putin lose? Does he lose? That's why, will he do whatever it takes, chemical weapons, biowarfare, whatever he has up his sleeve, in order to escalate this to a point where he cannot lose?
Well, that's the big question here, and whether or not Putin is going to continue this relentless drive to try and take the country, or whether he's going to back off. And right now there's no sign the Russians are going to back off, and I expect that this war is going to drag on for many more months. The Russians have lost, according to various sources, including Ukrainian and British intelligence sources, up to 15,000 troops out of 200,000. That's a large number. Can they sustain losses of 30, 40, 50,000 troops, which is what they'll have if they continue the war for another few months? Maybe they can, maybe they can't. I mean, it's a very large number. They've lost as many troops already as they've lost in the entire Afghanistan campaign in the 1980s, actually. So these are large numbers of troop losses, and so. But at the same time, we cannot underestimate just how ruthless Putin is, and he doesn't care about human life. He'll kill civilians in large numbers. He may use chemical weapons. If there's the use of chemical weapons, NATO has to have a planned response in place for that. You can't accept that on European soil today. The use of chemical weapons also will directly impact the rest of Europe as well. Basically, Biden's got to describe exactly what the U.S. response is going to be. We don't know, because he hasn't said anything about it. We need to warn the Russians about exactly what's going to happen if they use chemical weapons, or if they start setting up concentration camps and starting putting hundreds of thousands of people in death camps and so on, which they're quite capable of doing, the Russians. So, evil, barbaric, and savage is basically what the Russian military are today, under Putin's direction. And
absolutely,
stand up to this barbarism.
Right, but will they take? The question is, will they take any sort of warning from the U.S. seriously when there have been no consequences? And along those lines,
it's a very good question.
You have President Biden, you have Jen Psaki delivering this tough rhetoric from the podium. We're going to deliver, killer sanctions, and we're going to do this, and we're going to make them, really, really bring down Russia. But at the same time, we're using the Russians to try to broker a deal with Iran's regime. They're the go-between, and we're making promises to the Russians. Not only promises. They want this deal so badly, which is an awful deal, and that's a different show. You'll have to come back and we'll talk more about that. But they are pushing Russia and Iran closer together, creating an alliance, obviously, to add to that China, this trifecta. And at the same time, we're saying we're going to punish Russia. Why would they take us seriously when we're basically punishing them on one hand, superficially, and behind the scenes rewarding them with this incredible bonus.
This Lisa, I mean, your comments just now go to the heart of the problem here, which is that so Biden talks tough in a press conference, and you've got Jen Psaki saying all sorts of things, and all sorts of warnings against the Russians, but at the same time they're actually using Russia as a negotiating partner in the Iran nuclear deal. What message does that send to our adversaries? And it's a message of weakness, confusion, muddled thinking. So whatever Biden says, I think the Russians just think he's a pushover. That's the reality. Biden's no Ronald Reagan. I mean, he's barely even, Jimmy Carter, really. I mean, Carter was stronger than Biden, actually. And in fact, Jimmy Carter makes, Joe Biden look like, or actually, Joe Biden makes Jimmy Carter look like General Patton, perhaps. So this is the reality. How can you win like this? And, Biden doesn't even talk about victory in Ukraine. He never even discusses that possibility. Right. It's a kind of, I don't know, it's a sort of mixture of sort of, bizarre strategic thinking with defeatism and cowardice and all sorts of things going on. This Biden White House is an absolute disaster. It really is. It's a catastrophe for the free world. The fact that we're led by people who have no sense of leadership or vision at all. And I mean, it is incredibly dangerous, the current situation, which is why the Russians are in Ukraine today, why the Chinese are threatening Taiwan, why the Beijing-Moscow axis is closer than it has been since the 1950s. And so on so many fronts, I mean, this presidency is fundamentally undermining America's leadership in the world. And our enemies are taking full advantage of that. And as you point out on the Iran front, it sends completely contradictory signals. So the Russians, they just think Biden, they think they can get away with anything, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll have to leave it there. I know you have a packed schedule with all of the TV and radio appearances you're doing. I encourage you all to follow Nile on Twitter, on social media, read his columns. He's brilliant. He's witty. He's savvy. He understands and connects the dots for us brilliantly. Thank you so much for coming back on our show. We'd love to have you again very, very soon. And to the rest of you who would like to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube, go to youtube.com/Lisa Daftari. And to subscribe for free to our daily top 10 email, go to foreigndesknews.com and you can subscribe there. We will see you all next week.